the future seasons and sort of think towards the future for this team, I think that might be valuable. And the question that would kind of pose to me, Jason, is does that mean that they would need to move on from Andre Drummond?
Drummond's a franchise guy. I mean, he's having another all-star caliber season, but the big picture question for the Pistons is what exactly are they trying to accomplish? I mean, they have two over-the-hill former absolute superstar studs on their team in Griffin and Derrick Rose. Can you imagine the makeup of this Pistons team if they had 2012 Blake Griffin and 2012 Derrick Rose pre-injury? What that team would look like? I mean, we'd be pegging them a title contender. We mentioned Detroit as a potential trade destination for a guy like DeMar DeRozan if he decides to part ways with from San Antonio. And honestly, that front has gotten real quiet since we talked about it last week, but I digress. So I'm not quite sure what the Pistons are trying to accomplish because they can't attract a mega free agent, and they are building through the draft. Other than Luke Kennard, their last draft stud was Andre Drummond. You know, Thon Maker's a reclamation project. Reggie Jackson was a cast-off from the Thunder, has been there for a long time, but they haven't really been able to build a solid foundation. So I don't necessarily think that trading their best players and starting over is a bad thing, because in order for the Pistons to be what they were in the early 2000s once again, they're going to have to build from the ground up, and that's going to take a couple of high lottery draft picks because, spoiler alert, no players are going there in free agency. I'm still shocked Derrick Rose made that decision, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that it's tricky because ultimately Blake Griffin isn't going to get you anything in a trade right now. He's just not. And I would be capital T terrified of paying Andre Drummond a max contract. And that's what he's going to want. I mean, let's not split hairs here. He is going to ask the Pistons for a max contract. And they are going to have to swallow very, very hard if they decide to go that way, Jason, because not only will they be paying a guy who cannot be one of your top 3 offensive players max money, he's not a great defender. He just isn't. He's a great rebounder, but he's not a great defender. And on top of that, it's still unclear if he is at his best when paired with a big man like Blake Griffin. And so, knowing that you're paying Blake Griffin for a couple more seasons, because let's be real here, Blake Griffin is picking up his player option in 2021. So you got 2 more years of Blake Griffin after this one. I don't think you can pay Andre Drummond the max. I don't think you can do it. Now, he could surprise everyone and pick up his player option. I don't see that happening because I think he's going to get pretty close to a max in the offseason from some team. But I think if you're the Pistons, if you're not going to make the playoffs this year, you need to seriously consider trading Drummond because you're not going to get higher value for him than probably right now. The moment you sign him to a max deal, his value craters. No one is trying to pay a traditional center who can only play center, by the way, that kind of money. So to me, that is the start and end of this discussion of what are the Pistons going to do. It has to be about Drummond and whether they can move him. And the scary part to me is that if they start asking around the league, I think they might get crickets because I just don't see many teams that would want to trade for Drummond. And that's what makes this such an interesting experiment, because I wonder if they will try to kind of get to free agency and just see if a team will actually pony up that max contract. But to me, that's kind of the interesting place they find themselves now. If they don't trade him, they could risk losing him for nothing, Jason.
Well, that's an interesting point, Ben. I think, though, that I would put Drummond probably 4th on my list of star players likely to be traded this season. In no particular order, I think the top 3 are Chris Paul, DeMar DeRozan, and Kevin Love. So I think it's going to be interesting where Drummond falls on that list. I mean, the Pistons did get a pretty important win tonight in Cleveland against the Cavaliers, and we'll see if they can build on that. I mean, there's some separation, though, in the East. You know, the Nets are the 8th seed right now, or the 7th seed right now. Then you have the Magic. And right now, the Pistons are coming in only a game out of a playoff spot. So there is plenty of time left. But I would say Drummond's probably fourth on my list of players likely to be traded.
Do you see anywhere that he might go? Do you see any team that might trade for him, or even a team that could sign him in the offseason or try to get him? I mean, it's hard
The
to
Los
find
Angeles
teams.
Clippers. The Clippers. Imagine the
Oh,
Clippers with Drummond.
wow. That is a spicy hot take. I kind of like that one. He would be really interesting. Yeah, he would be
I
really
mean,
interesting, man.
as good as Harrell is as a small ball five, we said in the offseason that Ivica Zubac is not the long term answer there at the five. So, I mean, if the Clippers want to be a tax team, go for it all this year. Granted, they don't really have any picks left, and I don't know what a package would look like in return for Drummond. But since it's an expiring contract, I don't think the deal would be too hard to put together. But yeah, him on the Clippers would be
I,
scary.
I have one other team that would be just really interesting. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think would be fascinating. What about the Boston Celtics? What if the Boston Celtics decided to make a move? Trade, maybe they trade that Memphis pick that they have. They make a move
I
there.
don't
They,
see it.
I don't necessarily see it either, but they're a team that has the contracts to make that deal. They could trade, a few of their guys. They could trade. I mean, I don't know if they'd really trade Hayward for him, but I mean, they could make that deal happen if they really wanted to. And I don't know. I mean, it's just I think it's pretty interesting to fit. I mean, how they make it work, I don't think they're going to give up Hayward to do it, and I think they'd need to do that, or they'd have to give up Smart, Tice, and Cantor or something like that. I just don't see them doing that. But I have to tell you, it is a fascinating what if to me because if you put him with Kemba, Tatum, Brown, I mean, one of the things that they're going to struggle with a little bit is rebounding with that smaller group. All of a sudden, you put those guys, those smaller guys out there with Drummond. I mean, that's really interesting to me. If you're playing small ball, but then you've got Drummond down low, I mean, that gives him the paint. And also, I mean, we know he gobbles up rebounds. I mean, he's leading the league by a mile. So, at any rate, I agree with you. I think the Pistons are definitely a kind of a slept-on team. So it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens with them and what happens with Drummond as the season progresses.
Yeah, I don't think the Celtics are a likely destination real quick because Tice has been really good. I know they also
Yeah, yeah.
lost Baines with Al Horford. Baines doing his thing down in Phoenix while DeAndre Ayton's still suspended in those 25 games, which I think are about halfway done now. But Tyson Cantor have been a solid 1-2 punch of the five for the Celtics. So I don't think they would make that move. If they did, it'd be a bit out of desperation. The Clippers would just be a story of the rich getting richer.
It's true. I mean, it would be really interesting, and I mean, obviously they've been excellent. And another team, Jason, that has quietly been pretty good without their best player is your Brooklyn Nets. Now, admittedly, they did lose their last game, but they are 6-4 in their last 10. They're at 500, as you mentioned. They are in the 7th seed right now. Kyrie Irving is expected to miss, I think it's another 2 games. That's what they said. I mean, what do you make of this team and the way that they have been playing without Kyrie? And how did you feel about a game against a rival team in the tri-state area?
So since we last spoke, the Nets were beating up on some bad teams, which they should have been doing, and they had an interesting week. They had the home and home with Boston, sandwiching Thanksgiving Day, and then they had that home game on Sunday against the Heat. Now, the Celtics game on Friday, even though the Nets won, that was a noon start, and then the Heat game was a 3 p.m. start. So I don't think the players are used to playing in the afternoon. Obviously, when all your games are at 7:30 or later, depending on what time zone you're in. But yeah, I mean, the game on Wednesday, whatever, it was the first big test for them. Kemba was back. They hung in there. They lost. But Friday, I thought it was very important getting that win. They made Kemba Walker look mortal. They made Jason Tatum look not like a superstar, but just a regular star because he was hitting some huge shots. But Jaylen Brown was super quiet. I thought the Nets had an all-around good effort. Heads-up play, the dagger coming from a dunk by Jared Allen, Joe Harris making the right decision, and Dinwiddie helping close the game out. So they had some momentum carrying into their game against the Heat on Sunday, but they couldn't close out. They had a 7-point lead with 2-3 minutes to go, and then they didn't score the rest of the way. The Heat came back. Every time down the floor, you knew exactly what they were going to do. Jimmy Butler was driving. Goran Dragic was driving.
Yeah.
And the Nets blew that game. The only thing I didn't like that still gives a bit of a sour taste in my mouth is the final possession of that loss because Spencer Dinwiddie just dribbled down the clock, didn't look to make a move or a play, and just hoisted up a prayer that wound up being an air ball. And that's not the Spencer Dinwiddie that we've seen being the Eastern Conference Player of the Week last week, one that is averaging over 20 points a game in the absence of Kyrie Irving and Karis LeVert, one who, has really looked like the best player on the net so far, given all the injuries they've had. So I just hope that they could come out now. They have a couple of winnable games this week in Atlanta against Charlotte, so they have an opportunity to stack a couple more wins against teams that are worse than them. Because right now, Ben, I know Kyrie's out, and I hope he comes back soon, and ditto for Karis LeVert, but the top of the East is slowly slipping away from them. If you take a quick look at the Eastern Conference standings, I mean, the Nets are 10-10, but they are 5.5 games back of the Raptors, who are the 2 seed. They're 3 games behind the Pacers, who are in front of them in the 6 seed. So they have some work to do, Ben, for sure. The good thing is that reinforcements are on the way. I mean, there's something quick I want to get into about the Nets, but do you have anything on their actual play from the last week?
I mean, the one thing with the Miami game that I found really disappointing was the lack of aggressiveness from Jared Allen. Um, he's a guy who I really was expecting a lot from him this year, and I mean, I have to say I haven't been thrilled with the way that Atkinson has really split his minutes with DeAndre Jordan. I just think Allen's a much better player at this stage of his career, and I've said it 1,000 times already, so I won't say it again. But I just these are games where I would have liked to have seen him be a little bit more aggressive, especially with some of the guys out. A lot of their perimeter players were struggling, and it was just a little disappointing that he wasn't able to become a bigger part of the offense. When Prince is just really off, and Temple, Garrett Temple was just missing everything. It's just they need another guy who can kind of score, and it ended up having to be DeAndre Jordan, and that was a little disappointing for someone who's a big believer in Jared Allen, because it shows that there's still some room for him to grow. I mean, and that's great, but at the same time, this was the type of game where you really needed him to be a little bit more of a force, and he just wasn't there on offense for them. And I think that was a little worrisome for me, because we haven't seen him be as aggressive as I would like. And again, I think part of that is that he's not getting the minutes, but I would like to see him be more aggressive on offense. That was one of my big takeaways from this game.
See, I feel like he has been aggressive. I think that one game was a bit of an outlier, but his growth and development is a big proponent of why people hold Kenny Atkinson in such a high regard as far as a developmental coach goes. He's getting better during games. He's drawing up great plays after timeouts, which is great to see. But Jared Allen has put on muscle. He's shown that he can be an enforcer. And from when he was taken late in the first round of the 2017 draft due to character concerns about his desire to play the game, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of teams around the NBA kicking themselves for not taking Jared Allen. And much like Karis LeVert, he's a cornerstone of this franchise and a big reason why Kevin Durant wanted to go there, why Kyrie Irving wanted to play with him. So I think Allen is off to a great start. I mean, he could be an all-star maybe in another year or two, depending on, Drummond's decline and all these other great big men in the East, Al Horford. But right now, Jared Allen is playing exactly the way I would like to see him play as a Nets fan. There's still room for growth, and I'm excited to watch it as the kid is still Ben, only 21 years old. So now, as we're gearing towards the end of the show here, we're going to have to break some news that unfortunately we will not have a show next week. It's my fault. Ben is there for you guys 24/7. He eats, sleeps, and breathes basketball. But I have a couple trips coming up this month. I'm headed to New Orleans this weekend for a few days. So by the time I get back, it's really too late to do a show next week. So there's something I wanted to touch on regarding the Nets, since this will be a decision will be made before we do our next show. So Wilson Chandler is suspended 25 games for PED use. He's almost done with that suspension. I think he's eligible to return around December 15th. And the Nets have a decision to make, because when Chandler was suspended, and obviously this is the year of PED suspensions in the NBA when you have DeAndre Ayton and John Collins also on that list. But the Nets were granted a roster exemption, which they were used to sign Iman Shumpert, who's a friend of Kyrie Irving and who's now a part of the rotation in Brooklyn. So right now they have 16 guys on the roster if you include the two-ways and if you include Wilson Chandler. So when he's eligible to return, the Nets have a decision to make. They have to cut somebody. And, Ben, I need a little bit of Nets therapy right now, because as a fan sitting here, I have no idea who the hell they should cut. I mean, it can't be Shumpert. You know, he's friends with Kyrie Irving. He won a